Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and I'm guessing all of you know by now, but today is Giving Tuesday. Many of you have probably heard from a lot of the charitable organizations that you give to regularly, and it's generally a theme of this show after the elections to shift gears from politics to giving people opportunities to use this season to give back in ways that don't involve just buying more stuff. So with that in mind, my guest tonight is Michelle Bicking. She is, I guess, the founder of Hidden Acres Farm. And I've known Michelle via email and Facebook probably for several years, but we never really met in person before tonight. So welcome, Michelle. I'm really glad you could make it down here.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, I mean, you were a social worker by profession, correct?
I am.
How did Hidden Acres Farm come to be?
Hidden Acres Farms, Inc. is the second iteration of an organization that I founded 4 years prior. The organization was originally called Self-Injury Awareness Network Incorporated. And for those of you who may not know what self-injury is, it is intentional harm to one's body that's done by the person. And I identify as a survivor. I started self-injuring at age 6. And when I reached my early 30s and thinking about starting a family, I really wanted to resolve those issues around, at the source of it. So I was looking for support systems in Connecticut, in and around Connecticut, for adults who self-injure. And I couldn't find anything. Everything required some form of inpatient stay, and there was always an out-of-pocket cost that I just couldn't afford. So I decided that I would become what I was looking for. And what I was looking for was an opportunity to meet with other adults who were active in their recovery as well as still struggling to reach their own form of sobriety around self-harm. And for us to do things that involved our body. Like I had learned through my studies online and offline that self-injury is a disease of connection. We have a very limited connection to whether it's our thoughts, our physical presence. So the work has to be done around getting the body more reacquainted with the mind. So I wanted to do things such as swimming and biking and Tai Chi. So I was very excited to build that network. And I was very successful for the first 4 years. And I decided in 2016 that a part of my healing had involved, having our own homestead on our 2 acres in Tolland. And I wanted to explore that possibility in, opening those doors for others. So we changed our mission, we changed our name to speak to the farming aspect of it, of healing, and that's where we are right now.
Wow, for those of us who live in New London, of course, having 2 acres in your backyard just seems like a dream.
Yes. We have 1 full acre in front. Even though we're on ledge, the soil is actually pretty decent once we got some lime into it. And it was marvelous. I mean, the first year there, I had these monster pumpkins and squash, and I felt so redeemed. Here was something that I put into the ground, that I nursed, and it came alive. And it just really, set a flame, something in me to want to be able to do this with others. So.
And from speaking for myself, I mean, I love dirt. It's like there's something very connected about just having contact with the earth.
Yes.
So I do some urban gardening in my yard, but also in parks. Not so much vegetable gardening, but I think that you were talking about becoming connected. That's a big piece of it. So what do you have right now at Hidden Acres Farm?
Outside of our little plot at home, the organization is co-located in my house for a variety of reasons. It's a matter of finding a site that's appropriate for others to visit. So we're still in search of looking for that special place. We also do a lot of what has been framed as workforce development trainings, where we put on convenings that speak to the experience of particularly farmers of color. and what they're looking to learn, who they're looking to get connected to. And outside of that, just being able to be a resource for others who are new and beginning farmers, coming into the state, or if they live here, trying to find out how do they start their own farm from scratch. Are there other organizations or other individuals who are interested in partnering with them? So, yeah.
Well, interestingly, next week, people should know that the guests on the show will be people from Fresh New London, which is also an organization that promotes urban farming and food justice. So this is a kind of a good connection with that show. But when you mentioned, getting farmers of color involved, I guess many of us, most of us maybe have that stereotype of farmers being, white guys with like straw-colored hair.
Absolutely, in their 60s and riding that tractor into the sunset. I think that's what many people in the States, visualize their farmer to be. But their farmer can come in any color, any age, from any background, or any orientation, sexual or otherwise. And I think that the beauty behind that needs to be shown more often. So I know in the state of Connecticut there are a number of quote-unquote minority farmers. There are persons who work with different specialties, different certifications such as halal and kosher. I know there are a lot of landless farmers here who may have work in the capacity of a manager but don't actually own the land, almost like a new age sharecropping. But you don't hear those voices, so I'm hoping to be a part of the process of making those voices heard.
Well, you mentioned the present day sharecroppers, but I think that's part of the issue that we're addressing. There is a group in New London right now that's working on trying to set up a community land trust, largely around housing, but not exclusively. And some of the background information that we've been trying to get out to the community is what's happened to land. And if you go back, the United States a couple centuries back, many of the people doing the farming work were people of color.
Yes.
But they didn't end up being able to own their land.
And they were often cheated out of the land they were able to gain ownership of through a variety of means, in my limited understanding. And it's interesting when we think back to when there was a discussion of reparations, that every person of color, every black person was going to get that 40 acres and a mule, which never happened. And as I've learned in my my conversations with my elders in the food justice and social justice movement in New England and the Mid-Atlantic region, land's not something that you can grow per se. That there's always strength in owning a piece of property. So I have been encouraged many times to put down a stake and be able to own the land that I'm on, as to invite others to either share in the space or to spend time. I've been asked many times to create a retreat for people who identify as being teachers and healers, so they can come and take a break for themselves. So I'm very, very interested in that. There's 141 acres in Colchester calling my name.
Wow.
So we'll see what happens in the next 2 years.
Wow, that sounds like, for Connecticut, we don't have the kind of topography that makes for huge farms.
Right.
Anything over 100 acres really sounds big by our standards.
Indeed. And I was very surprised to stumble upon it. And there are several plots in Litchfield County and other areas of the state where it's still uncommon to find, it is common to find several large tracts of land. But you're right, there's very few opportunities to be able to farm or even to use space of that size.
So you've had one event fairly recently. It sounded really interesting, I have to tell you.
Thank you.
It's timing for me personally. It was the Saturday before Election Day,
Yeah,
and
so
those of us
rough.
who are like embroiled in like local politics, like, I can't go. But we do have some slides, and I wanted to show them just so you can talk about the event. And it shows, I think, a lot of the individuals and organizations that you've been forming partnerships with.
Indeed.
Okay, so this is in very random order, so we'll
No
just take
worries.
them as they go.
No worries. The young lady on the screen right now, her name is Amina Oluba. I cannot pronounce her last name, and I know she watches this. She will never forgive me. First name is Amina, and she's a spoken word artist, a food justice advocate, and she is through Soul Fire Farm, which is in Grafton, New York. Soul Fire Farm is one of a handful of Black-owned, Black-run organizations that's an incorporated nonprofit and also has an active farming presence in the Hudson Valley. They do so many different things, along with training opportunities for new and beginning farmers of African American, Latino, Latinx descent. They do a lot of food distribution opportunities where they create food baskets for the poor. They do a lot of youth work. Just an amazing group of people that I was very grateful that I was able to contact and actually have her as a representative from the organization. And they're called Soul Fire Farm.
Now, is what they're doing something that you
Yes.
are striving towards?
Exactly.
I'm guessing they've been doing this for a while.
Yes, it hasn't been a decade just of yet, I don't think, but they are the template in which I plan to build off of in Connecticut. I too would like to provide training opportunities for ethnic and religious minorities in the state that is trauma informed, that really speaks to their lived experience, being disenfranchised, having limited access to quality foodstuffs, and actually takes more of stock of their heritage, regardless of where they come from. And I think there are none farmer training programs throughout the country that actually does that. So I've applied for an NSARE partnership grant in order to fund that process. I have 3 advisors, 2 of them are farmers, to help me build a curriculum from scratch. So I'm very excited.
That does sound really exciting.
Yes.
It's an interesting merging probably for you of the different pieces of your professional and personal life.
Indeed, the clinical social worker comes out to play. My background is in trauma-informed modules and different ways to be of service to different people. The striving homesteader farmer, who's looking for certain resources, certain contacts, certain skills and skill building activities, is definitely present. So it really does pull from a variety of my experiences to date.
Now,
in this picture, okay, Amina's there on the far left, I believe. If I'm looking straightly at the picture, is Karen Washington. She's the founder of Bugs, which is Black Urban Growers of New York. I refer to her as one of the elders in the food justice movement, Black food justice movement. And she was also one of the speakers at the event. I really wish that it was tape recorded. Because she was the room shook. I mean, she has that kind of presence. To the right is Issa Muhajid. He is actually a board member for Hidden Acres Farms, and he is one of the founding members of CT Core. And they've done an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time around food justice in Hartford and Bridgeport and New Haven.
uh-oh, okay, well, we are back. We'll try to get slides back again, but until
that was
we
great.
do, yeah, and we'll come back to this event. But at one point, you mentioned reparations in terms of land. Now, reparations is a pretty hot topic
Yes.
these days, and it seems as though different individuals, different groups have different. Even if there's agreement that some kind of reparations are needed because, there's been a lot of thievery in the
Yes.
past in different ways. But there's been a lot of disagreement, I think, about what form it should take. So what's your take on it? Is land and farming the answer? Is, I don't know, promoting small business in low status communities the answer? Or is there more than one way to go about it?
I think, and I'm by means no authority on what should be done in terms of rectifying past wrongs to different ethnic groups in this country, but I believe that reparations can take the form of being able to open the doors of around education, around land access, around monetary resources for those who have been disenfranchised in the recent and extended past. So how would that happen? That I don't know. I think there's a lot of people that needs to come to the table, and I know that it has happened already where people are having discussions of what that should look like. What do I feel about that in terms of my own heritage? I'm first generation. My family is originally from the Eastern Caribbean, Barbados and St. Vincent. So I identify as black, but I don't identify as African American. For me, there's a subtle difference. So I don't think that reparations in this country would include me if it's done based by race and place.
Interesting.
So it's very hard for me to wrap my head around what that would look if it was solely to go on someone's ethnic or racial heritage. And then for being mixed heritage, my great-grandmother is Irish. I mean, where does it end? I mean, is there a certain concentration of blackness that I have to have in order to be eligible? I don't know.
And I think people from the islands present very unique issues.
Yes.
I know when I worked for Head Start, one of the moms whose child was one of my students, we ask, it's a federal program, we ask, the family to say what race and ethnicity the child is. And the mom was from, I don't know, Trinidad maybe? And her ancestry was actually from like the Indian subcontinent.
Yep.
And it's like, there's no category.
My mother, I remember she told me that when she came to this country, she learned that she was black. Because there was no real discussion of that when she was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There was no box to check off. So she was treated as if she was black. She had to go to segregated bathrooms.
Wow.
So that's how she learned that she was black. To my knowledge, especially in the 40s and 30s, it was more of an issue of class than it was of race. Race was something that they bumped face forward into when they came to this country.
Wow. Well, I think also when housing, when GI Bill loans and housing HUD loans came into being, there were some weird decisions on who was white enough to get the money.
That's right.
And, I'm Jewish, I think 23andMe says I'm like 96% Ashkenazic Jew. And you know what? At one point, the Jews were not considered white enough.
That's
and
right.
then a certain point came and wow, it's a miracle, now we're white.
Yeah,
and it seems so arbitrary.
It does. I think whiteness is the only category in this country that has been expanded upon. I mean, the Italians weren't white for a number of years. The Irish were not white for a number of years when they first came to this country. So, yeah, whiteness is the only thing that as a group has been expanded upon, whereas other groups have been, in many ways, narrowed. Persian was not considered white. So, yeah. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. It makes one think that whiteness has not so much to do with color, but a lot to do with how much privilege you're privy to.
I am absolutely in agreement.
I don't know. Do we have pictures again? Try it. Okay. Well, yes.
Okay. So the young lady on the left is the mother of one half of the team of Soulfire Farm, Miss Fatale. She actually lives in West Hartford. She's a psychologist, and I was very excited to see her in the audience. The lady on the right, whose name I cannot remember, has had an interest in, and still remains to have an interest in, working with foster youth and farming. So we were just going to discuss some different activities that we could possibly do to jointly through the organization to introduce foster kids to farming. That's me trying not to grin. I was so excited to have these two ladies in the same picture with me. There's a lot of love right there, and I'm very grateful that they were there. We had approximately 70 people in attendance, including the 15 exhibitors from across the state. I really wanted to try and capture the room the best I could, but I was amazed by the turnout. And the space itself was the 224 Eco Space in Hartford, a lovely space. Highly recommend it. Very intimate, it really allowed for us to have some very in-depth conversations about stuff that was very uncomfortable. We talked a bit about, no, I shouldn't say we talked a bit, we talked a lot about race and ethnicity. We talked a lot about the ways in which persons of color have been systematically out of the picture related to agricultural policy. So it was very, 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 very moving in many ways. It's another side of the room. That is Miss Patricia Kelly. She is the founder of Ebony Horsewomen out of Hartford. She, in addition to doing therapeutic horseback riding, offers a lot of different activities to children and youth that are Hartford residents and beyond. She was one of our speakers that day, and she talked a lot about reclaiming our voice through the foods that we eat, that we must be more mindful of what we bring into our bodies. And she's very, careful to talk about, without upsetting other people who are omnivores,
Yes.
the importance of having a plant-based diet, especially to avoid different health-related conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure. At the end of the half-day conference, we had an opportunity to have a panel discussion. So there were questions posed by the audience about items that were brought up in their individual presentations, and there were also just some thoughts that folks wanted to share and get their input from the panel members.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm. So I think I got a few of the tables.
Yeah. Okay. Now, then I see you had Connecticut NOFA.
Connecticut NOFA was there.
So what organizations have you partnered with so far?
Oh, I think informally, everyone who was present at this event, I identify with as a partner. There have been discussions about what a partnership should look like with different entities, so we're trying to forge that out. Like Hartford Food Systems, Martha was there. She didn't have a table, but she did make time to show. And we're still trying to figure out, okay, well, how best should we work together in the coming months? So, yeah.
And then I think this might be the last one.
Okay.
So, yes,
Very
okay.
cool. That's pretty good.
Okay, it was random, but it was fine.
Yeah, thank you.
A couple of things came up there when you mentioned the plant-based diet. I always, I am an omnivore.
I'm right there with you.
But, I wonder, in a place like Connecticut, I've never tried to have a plant-based diet which is also based on locally produced food. And I think there are some parts of the world where that's probably not that difficult.
Right.
But, to make things taste good that are vegan. And we do, if we have Green Party events, we always have, food, so everyone's welcome.
Right.
But, if you're using coconut oil to make things taste good, it's like came from far away, and I don't know what the environmental impact is. So it is really complicated.
It can be, and it requires quite a bit of imagination on the part of someone who hasn't been introduced to such a diet growing up. Like for me, very much omnivorous in my family. However, my mother shared with me and my father that the only time that they got meat was usually during the holidays because it was so expensive. So they more often ate a lot of fish. So sometimes it's a mother of necessity. That you eat what you can get access to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might not be a bad way to eat, depending on where you live.
Depending on where you live, absolutely.
Now you have a couple other events that are scheduled for the spring, and they're actually, it intrigued me because all three events are quite different in what their focus is. And so maybe you can talk a little about what you have planned for March and then what you have planned for June.
Absolutely. So on March 24th, which is a Saturday, 2018, I have an event which is more of a convening. I often use that word because I want to make it seem that we're gathering of family members, of extended family members to work on a particular topic or talk through an issue or just share. And it's called Spokes on the Medicine Wheel, Reclaiming Pre-Colonial Herbal Applications and Remedies. So the idea behind this was sparked by a conversation I had with a young lady who's based in Maryland, I believe. And she works with, she makes hemp-based teas. So we were talking about different ways that I could bring her up to Connecticut because she really wanted to work with me on different events going forward. And I talked to her about, well, I had asked her about her knowledge of ways in which herbs or plants have been used as medicine in time memorial. So, she also specializes in cacao ceremonies, which I'm learning more about how fresh cacao is used for spiritual purposes. And I was intrigued by that. So, I shared with her, the possibility of bringing others together to discuss their knowledge and share their thoughts on the topic and where the place is for this knowledge for future generations. So that spurred the creation of this upcoming event.
And when you mentioned that, hemp teas, it seems so frequently true with modern medicine that many of big pharma's medicines are extracts from old herbal remedies.
Absolutely.
And they've been purified and manufactured and dosage controlled, but really they started out very often not synthesized in a test tube, but purified from an extract from a plant or animal.
Absolutely. I was reading an article the other day about a young First Nations woman who had, for her senior project, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I know she had created an extract from chokecherry pudding, and it turned out it killed cancer cells at contact. So she's going to have a very bright future.
Wow.
Because, chokecherry pudding, chokecherry jam had often been used as a spread, as a side, and had a lot of different properties that were used for medicinal purposes as well. And it was amazing that they were able to quantify that and found out that, yes, that it did have a cancer-killing additive to it, the seeds themselves.
Now, you brought up hemp, and of course, I've been interested for quite a long time in what our drug policy is. And of course, anyone who's followed it knows that cannabis was made illegal for reasons that have nothing to do with whether it's a useful substance or a dangerous substance. It was made illegal for political reasons more than medical reasons, and if you think of industrial hemp in particular.
Yes.
So right now in Connecticut, we have legal medicinal marijuana. What do you see are the next steps in both decriminalizing cannabis in general for recreational use, but even more so in industrial hemp, which to me seems like it could be the basis of a lot of small industry, which we really need.
I agree. My knowledge base is scant in terms of an understanding of the future of medicinal and recreational marijuana. To each their own. I mean, that's my understanding. If it works for you, by all means, do so. Use it responsibly and for your own purpose. As far as industrial hemp, I too have a personal interest in growing hemp for the purpose of creating hemp milk. My son, he's 22 months. He will drink nothing but hemp milk. I introduced that before dairy, as I did my own research and found out all the benefits of hemp milk. So my interest is in creating hemp milk and a hemp-based baby formula for vegans and vegetarians who don't want to introduce their children to dairy before age 4.
And it probably is more healthful than soy, which can be controversial.
Very and very harmful especially for male children. Affects their hormones and in ways that may not be remedied immediately. But again, I need to learn more about that. But in my travels of understanding the hemp plant, which is distinguished between marijuana from its concentration of THC, which is the stuff that gets you high. Hemp does not have the stuff that gets you high. And even if you try to smoke, you can make yourself very sick and get no kick from it. So I think that some of it needs to be demystified a little bit more. I mean, hemp was very much legal when our founding fathers were here. They used it for many items, paper, textiles. I mean, it was immeasurable. Plastics, it could be made for. It's just the properties of the actual plant render it to be so useful in so many different ways. So I really do hope that a second look will be taken to making hemp legal on a national level as well as a state level. I know the governor had put forth some legislation that said for pilot projects that are run through UConn, the Extension Service, as well as I forget the other entity, were permitted. However, in my interactions with both entities, as well as Department of Consumer Services, Consumer Protection, they don't want to venture down that road because they're afraid that they would lose their federal funding.
Because hemp is still classified.
Hemp is still classified, yeah.
It's still scheduled, which even though it really does not have any psychotropic effects and really is not used, well, if you're ingesting it, it's like as hemp milk or, you know, I had a funny experience a few years ago. I had brought, I was invited to a potluck and I made apple strudel. And one of the ingredients in the recipe was ground almonds, and I didn't have any almonds, but I had some ground hemp seed.
That's right.
So I put hemp seed in instead, and wouldn't you know, someone who was at the potluck asked what was in it, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, good, I can eat it. I'm allergic to tree nuts, but I can eat hemp."
Yes.
So it's less, less of a cause of allergic reaction than many nuts, and so honestly,
and it can impart that nutty flavor that you're looking for as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So honestly, I always make the substitution now because you don't know who might be allergic to tree nuts.
Right.
And hemp, you're pretty sure people will be fine with.
Yes. And I have a husband who is gluten sensitive and is allergic to tree nuts, and he can tolerate hemp very well. And we've used it to substitute dairy on many occasions, potatoes, no matter what the recipe calls for. And it makes it so much creamier, and it also gives it that nutty taste. So, yeah.
Now, other than the federal government, what would you say are the biggest obstacles to industrial hemp becoming like a big cash crop in our state?
I think local will would be needed. There's some education that needs to be involved in introducing it as an agricultural crop. And I think, there's a place for entities that are well established in the state, like Connecticut Farm Bureau, the Extension Service, of course. UConn has a great stake in all ag-related business in the state. So I think that, some sort of collaboration on their part to get the word out on the value of the crop would be really helpful. Because, mostly the people that when I ask about industrial hemp and I ask people what their knowledge of it is, they often confuse it with marijuana. Which is fine, I'm not insulted by it.
Right, but I do think it's a consequence, though, of the war on drugs. That good research and good education is very lacking. Even, now the medicinal marijuana is available. Only now are people starting to see, well, you can have some with high THC levels, but some with low THC and higher CBDs. And edibles, you have to be really careful about dosage control, where you might not have had to feel that careful when just smoking it illegally,
Exactly.
But the education kind of lags behind the status.
I believe so.
So what you're saying about hemp is, if people are still confusing it and thinking, oh, I'm going to, hide my high THC plants in my hemp field, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. It's absolutely not going to happen. So, I think beyond that, then there's a great possibility once we actually cross those hurdles to really do some solid business and actually be, have a substantial place in the whole business of industrial hemp in this part of the country, because most of the industrial hemp comes out west, and the monies reaped from their yields have been amazing. It has been amazing. It has changed lives of farmers out west for the better, thankfully, and the lives of families affected as well in that area.
And Connecticut right now, we are not in a good fiscal situation, and our industries are, other than the defense industry, we really don't have a lot of small industries bubbling up.
No,
and
not really.
it just seems as though we should be looking at all the different potentials, and we're not yet. Maybe we don't feel desperate enough yet. I don't know.
Maybe. I do think ag is the future of Connecticut, though. I think that investment needs to be made, both private and public, in different agriculture-based industries, not just industrial hemp once it's legalized, and especially in farmers of color. I mean, there are many people who are interested in actually getting their feet wet and doing business with the state, but there aren't resources. There isn't insufficient capital that folks are exposed to. Land is always an issue, finding arable land to grow. But I think the state should focus less on dairy and established legacy farmers and work with the smaller scale farmers.
And so so the agriculture, the hemp piece could be useful in terms of also linking growing hemp with small scale manufacturing of things like paper and fiber.
Yes, absolutely.
But when you talk, let's get back to talking about food. And many neighborhoods in New London are really considered food deserts.
Yes.
And there are many, I think a lot of our food here still comes from great distances. So what is the agricultural potential if we really focus more on growing food crops that can be used locally? How do we go about that?
Well, it was interesting. I was reading about food deserts the other day, and I talked to a gentleman who has a couple of urban farms in Springfield, Massachusetts area, and he reminded me that deserts are not places without life. I mean, life can thrive in the deserts, but they have to be, they assimilate, to their particular accommodations to their particular station. And for example, he actually referred to his neighborhood as a food swamp. You had all these fast food restaurants with all these low-calorie, no substance foods readily available and much cheaper than you could get at the local, Stop and Shop or Big Y or whatnot, and easier to get to. Like for example, I was interested, and I'm still interested in opening a food co-op with different entities in Springfield, Massachusetts, because especially in downtown area, there are no options to get fresh fruit, fresh fish, and food that's local. And there are plenty of farms in the area that will be willing to supply that. So I think part of the discussion has to be around creating food hubs within the areas that are most needy, so people can actually come to that place and sell their wares to community members and know that their stuff is valued and will be of local use. Addition to food hubs, I do really support the creation of food cooperatives that are run by neighbors, that are operated by neighbors. People have a say in what's available to others in their stores, and they can moderate the prices and whatnot to community needs. So food hubs and food cooperatives are one. I think some education still needs to be around the connection between these different conditions that are often developed because of the food that we eat or the food that we don't eat, and for people to recognize that there is a natural progression there, and that they can be a part of the process of stopping progression by making some concrete life changes.
As you're talking, I'm thinking this is kind of a time-sensitive issue. Back to the years I was working for Head Start and home visiting, a lot of the families I worked with were immigrant families, and they did tend to try their best to get raw ingredients and cook at home. But the families that had lived in poverty here in New England for a few generations, they really didn't see, not only didn't they see vegetables growing in the farm, they didn't see, raw carrots in the supermarket. Right. They really had so much more convenient access to fast food and convenience store food, and not really much access to farmers markets or food co-ops or community gardens or any place where they could actually, get hold of the food right out of the ground.
Right. And Patricia Kelly from Ebony Horsewomen, she was talking about that, and she said how she got the kids in her who attended her activities on grounds at Caney Park in Hartford to eat healthy. And it was interesting. She said, okay, well, I'll try just to, making the variety of foodstuffs available to them. The kids wouldn't touch it. Okay, I'll try to engage them in cooking meals with these foodstuffs. The kids wouldn't touch it. What worked, she said, was when there was no other option.
Wow.
So there was no option to run down the street to go grab a candy bar. There was no option for anything along those lines. And then the kids finally ate it because they were hungry.
Well, some might,
Yes.
argue that our very refined diet is kind of addicting, and
Yes.
if you are given a choice
If you give it a
between
choice, yes.
feeding what the white flour, white sugar foods, and something that your body isn't craving in the same way,
Right.
you're going to choose the bad stuff.
Right, right. Automatically, you will defer to that because that's what you're used to. So she didn't give them a choice, and they were willing to try it, and then they found out that they liked it, what they tried. So she thought that was very an interesting
That
anecdote
is
to
very
share.
interesting.
So I know for at least again in my limited exposure that it's more than just providing spaces for people to grow foods. It's more than setting up markets in areas that are accessible to low-income families. The whole culture around food needs to shift, as well as the person's individual commitment to their own livelihood and their own family's livelihood. I think until then we'll be an uphill battle.
Now, we didn't talk at all about the event that's coming up in June, but that's a whole other aspect of your work.
Indeed. So in June, between June 28th and June 30th, 2018, there will be a 3-day conference. The first 2 days are a series of workshops and opportunities to gather. The third day is a day of service in the community, where the focus is on women in agriculture. And that's actually the part of the name of the event, which is called Where Women Gather, a celebration of women in agriculture. I could not find in this part of the country, opportunities for the same. Most of the stuff that I've seen through different organizations have often been down south, especially that had conversations about the place of women of color in agriculture. So again, as with the founding of my organization, if I can't find something, I will be that something that I'm looking for. So I decided to pull together this event.
It sounds interesting. And when we were talking about hemp before, I couldn't help but think that many of our low status communities, people of color, have been very impacted by the war on drugs.
Yes.
A lot of before the show we were talking. I was talking about how so many of my preschool students had incarcerated parents, and they lived in neighborhoods that were not necessarily safe. And so it would seem almost to me as part of reparations to have people of color having an in on the legitimate business opportunities that are being provided now.
Agreed. And it's interesting, when you were sharing that with me, I was thinking of my year and a half that I spent as a school teacher for the Philadelphia School District, and I had a class of 32, and I would say 31 students out of the 32 had one or more parents incarcerated, or one or more parents deceased, and I had only one intact family in my classroom. So when I think of reparations, I don't just think of one particular ethnic group or even a handful. The Chinese and Chinese Americans who built the railroads, or the African enslaved who built everything.
Right.
I think of just the everyone in this country who's affected, because it's American history. As painful as it is something that we all have a stake in. And the least among us, those who are suffering the most, I think need to be taken care of in any possible way, whether it's making sure our elderly have access to food stuff, and just even a connect to a living person on a regular basis, and making sure that our sick and disabled have all the services that they need in order to thrive in their communities. So again, just thinking about our discussion earlier, that I think reparations could be seen as something that belongs to all of us in a way, and that that we should all be committed to making sure that everyone who can't manage for themselves or struggle with it have a home here.
Now, what are there specific challenges that women and particularly women of color, have if they want to embark on farming? I'm thinking you probably know some of these firsthand.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. When I went to one of my first events in Connecticut, the room was packed, but the seats on either side of me were empty. I didn't know how to take that. The only way I took it was badly, because there were people in the room who purposely stood so they didn't have to sit next to me. And this was last year, so this is one in like 1940 something. And this was in Connecticut.
So it's
Yes. I think that going back to the discussion of the stereotype of what a farmer looks like in this country, those were the people in the audience, and those were the people who were asking questions. There were 2 times that I asked a question and nobody saw me. Never mind, wanted to hear what I had to ask. So there is the discrimination in this state may be very subtle, and it can also be very blatant. And I don't think that enough has been done in ag to welcome people who may not look like that stereotype. And historically, the Department of Agriculture on the federal level has been atrocious in terms of lending to farmers of color, black farmers included, and are still in the throes of remediating that. So a lot of work needs to be done. I had a gentleman from NCRS who was at my event who said, Michelle, I think we supported an event like this before. I said, no, sir. This has never been done in the state of Connecticut, where I've had folks from your organization speak and actually be heard and listen to the voices of people of color. This has never been done in this state.
So maybe there's progress, but it sure seems slow.
It seems slow, but I had another gentleman who was there who asked for a part 2. They wanted an opportunity to strategize with the different organizations who were represented in the audience and talk about, practical as well as policy-led activities that could be done statewide to address some of the wrongs that were discussed. So there's hope. There's hope.
Now, we have like 4 minutes left.
Sure.
So Hidden Acres Farm is a nonprofit organization, which makes me think there are ways that you could use public support. So if a person who's watching this is interested in providing some kind of support, where can they get more information, and what kind of help would be useful to you?
Absolutely. I would greatly appreciate having input from people around the state about what they would like to see, what kind of work that needs to be done from an agricultural standpoint, from a food justice standpoint. I find that my strength has lied a lot in bringing people together. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to do so as often as I can do so. So anyone who is interested in joining me in that effort on a volunteer basis, I'm more than happy to have discussions with you, meet you for coffee, to see what can be done.
And I can attest to the fact that you'll drive a distance.
I will drive a great distance anywhere in the state.
Yes, Tallinn and New London is not that close.
Absolutely. So, and secondly, come to the events. Tell me what you think, tell me what you've learned, and yes, we can definitely make a difference in the state that's lasting.
Now, do you need any, either material things or do you need volunteers to do things to help organize?
Yes. I would really appreciate, since the work that I've been doing has been between me and God, pulling together different events over the last couple of weeks and organizing. I would really appreciate help with, the bare bones logistics of pulling events together. So anyone who has that interest in making the phone calls and scheduling places and to meet and to join in the conversation that way, yes.
And it sounds as though the next event in March, which it seems like it's far away, but it really isn't. 4 months out is not that far away when you're organizing things. Right. That sounds like a big event.
Yes. We're expecting anywhere from 150 to 300 people from across the country. And I also have a young lady who will be flying in from Barbados.
Wow.
Yes, from Barbados Botanical Society.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for
coming,
taking the drive down here. And next week, we're kind of going to continue a conversation about local food justice issues, and what's happening in New London, that Fresh New London, which is an organization that's been around probably for close to a dozen years now, is up to right now. So we'll see you then.
Yes.
And hiddenacresfarm.org is where people can go online to find out more information.
Ourhiddenacres.org.
Ourhiddenacres.org. Okay.
Indeed.
And so thank you again,
Thank you.
and we will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, nimpenda mzuri sana. Tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, ninakupenda sana. Tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, nimpenda mzuri sana. Tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika. Oh, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, yo, nimpenda mzuri sana. Tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, tuimbe Afrika, ninakupenda sana. Oh,